if you are joining virtually, can you give a thumbs up to make sure that you can hear us? Okay, that is much better. So welcome those of you that are in person or virtually. Hopefully you're able to engage either way. One thing I want to share with you, first of all, those of you that don't know me, my name is Pete Curdy. I'm the principal here at Glacier Ridge, and if you have not been aware, this is my 9th year at Glacier Ridge, and I'm so fortunate to be here. I love what I do. I love working with the people that I work with, the students, the staff, and the families, and it certainly is an honor and privilege. We also have a guest that we would like to introduce to you in a moment. But I want to first recognize that we are in a very difficult time. We're in a difficult time in terms of our world and community. We're also in a difficult time in terms of the health and safety in general. As you know a little bit about Glacier Ridge, kindness and empathy is something that has always been rooted into what we do, what we believe, and how we act. And I want to just start with a quote about empathy because it is so important in terms of how we agree or how we disagree and how we interact. And it's things that we're teaching our students on a day-to-day basis how to do that productively. So the quote is, empathy is a respectful understanding of what others are experiencing. You'll notice that nowhere in there does it say we are going to agree. Nowhere does it say that we are going to be unproductive. It is essentially listening, and how can we internalize and understand the perspectives of others without first trying to convince them of our own opinions, but truly listening first. And then sometimes the outcome can be how do we communicate what our thoughts and needs are, but reciprocating of that is the listening as well. So with that foundation, I want to turn it over to our new superintendent who comes to us from Hilliard, as you may know. And he has jumped right in and hit the ground running. And so he was very fortunate to offer to attend PTO meetings, and our PTO board and PTO in general capitalized on his generosity of time. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Marshausen, the superintendent of Dublin City Schools.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. I just speak for a couple moments and then I'll answer any questions that you have, and I'll open it up and just let you all fire away. When I took this job in May, we knew what we were getting into. And while COVID numbers were declining, and our hope was, as we started this school year, that we would be able to focus on what our mission is, and that's academic preparation for our young people. And we find ourselves once again in a situation where we're balancing that academic preparation with the safety protocols and mitigation strategies that we need to do to keep our young people safe. We are incredibly fortunate to live in a community that has, if not the highest vaccination rate, but one of the highest vaccination rates, not only in Franklin County, but in the state of Ohio. I've had the good fortune of speaking with folks in Governor DeWine's office on a frequent basis about what that vaccination rate means for us and our young people. When we look at a community where in our 2 major zip codes, we're now at 85% vaccinated, and our doctors committee will then talk about that other 15%, what percentage of them may have some level of immunity because they may have had COVID at one point or another. And as we look forward to hopeful approval for our 5 to 11-year-olds of vaccines, what does that mean? If what we're seeing at our high schools continues to hold, right now at all 3 high schools, I believe we have 17 total cases in a community where we have upwards of 14,000 students in that age group, 1,400 students in that age group. So we're doing okay right now. We look at our numbers every day. We talk to our health officials every day. I've got a doctors committee meeting tomorrow. We continue to monitor where we are. I know that Mr. Curdy and our principals will be having conversations about lunch again today. Are there ways to spread our elementary and middle school kiddos out more at lunch to keep those kids safe? Because right now our quarantines especially at one middle school in particular. If you happen to look at our dashboard, there's one middle school in particular that unfortunately has 34% of the sixth graders right now out on either quarantine or I think 19 COVID positive kids in one school that it traces back to lunch. So are we able to do something with that lunch situation? On the academic side of things, and what I hope we're able to do in the first year of my service as superintendent is to come to agreement on what is our mission and our vision and our strategy moving forward. It's been since 2007 since Dublin has had a strategic plan and has taken the time to identify where do we want to be and what do we want from our district academically. And I think there's an awful lot that we can agree on. When we bring people together, what brings us together is much more powerful than anything that's tearing us apart. And we have to be able to identify. I love when Pete gives a definition of empathy. I think we need to create that definition for equity. The district has a trademarked statement that's below our shamrock as a district that says committed to excellence and equity. And if I ask 100 people, I'd probably get 100 different answers. What does excellence mean and what does equity mean? I think we need to define those as a community in a way that we can all agree, that we all know what is academic excellence and how do we define equity in the Dublin City School District. Because once we all agree on the terms that we're using, it'll allow us to be more effective in communicating those and reaching those measurable goals that are so important. In any school district, our purpose is for when those kids walk across the stage of graduation, for them to be the best version of each kid who walks across the stage. And you want for your child, them to maximize their potential, for them to be challenged, for them to grow. And when your child graduates and walks down the steps of the Schottenstein Center with a diploma in their hand, you want them to be prepared for success in whatever's next. And how do we define that and personalize that and do that work? And that's what we need to really focus on and get that in a vocabulary in a way that we can all share and talk about that together. We've got a lot of work to do. And our commitment is we're going to be open and honest and transparent and answer any questions that folks have. And while we may not always agree, I tell people I want you to know the why. If you don't agree with something that we're doing, I want you to know the why we've made that decision, because we strive to be intentional and purposeful in every decision we make. And I know I don't make my best decisions based on emotions, and we give each other grace when we find ourselves in those positions, and we move on and we focus on that intentional behavior that allows us to achieve the outcomes that we want for our kids. So thank you for being here. We couldn't do this without the partnership and without the engagement that we have from our PTOs, from every parent and every guardian and every person in our district. We're here for kids, and that's what we do every day. So I'll answer any questions that any of you have. I don't know if the people there can ask questions. If you post something in the chat, Pete's got it up. So if you post something there, Pete can fire that away. Yes, sir.
What's the criteria to be set in our meeting? So that's number, like we have a criteria that we're trying to actually.
Yeah, when we put the mask mandate in place, and we've got a group of 15 doctors who I meet with every other week. The doctors talked about getting below that 50 cases per 100,000 and getting a positivity rate for children back below 1. So we are in our school district on the decline. We had a high of, it was in the 460s for cases per 100,000. I think we're back in the 200s. One of my questions for the Ohio Department of Health was, with 85% vaccinated and cases going up again, where do we get to a point that we do get that kind of community herd immunity. I know the Delta variant is something that they're concerned with breakthrough cases. We have 2 right now, total breakthrough cases when we look at our high school and our staff. So that would kind of be the benchmark. I hesitate to put a hard number on it because it's really what's the trend. If we get to 60 and it's trending down and we say, oh, we're getting comfortable here, then we can start having that conversation again. I am incredibly encouraged with the way things have gone at our high schools, simply because from what we see, the vaccine works, and what we see from our parents, the vaccine works. And I asked today, and I got an update of the 90 students who right now are COVID positive. None of them have what would be considered even moderate to severe symptoms, and none of them are in the hospital. So we've got an awful lot of kids sitting at home today who, in terms of how they feel, we are incredibly thankful that they feel okay. And we've got a lot of kids in quarantine who mom and dad want to know why they're not in school. And we're following the health department regulations. We've had a couple kids flip from quarantine to positive, but when I say a couple, like I can count them on my hands. So
what is your high school vaccination rate? You said with community vaccination.
it's overall 85%. When we break it into,
So that's students.
our overall vaccination rate is all eligible members of 43016 and 17. When you break it down into age groups, the 18 to 22-year-olds are higher. They're over 90%. Anecdotally, that would be because those kids are all going to college and the colleges are requiring it. We have more kids at Ohio State than we can count, and they're requiring it. When we look at that 15 to 17, we're near 80%. The 12 to 14 is in the 70%. So there is a little bit of lag for our younger students who are getting that. I know that we have some activities where coaches and advisors encouraged the vaccinations. If you're a member of a certain team and the coaches may have said, hey, we want to be able to keep playing. I do not foresee a time when we would mandate vaccines. I do not think that's a place that we would go. If you look at our community, there is a balance between what should be mandated and what should be parent choice. And I think it's something that we're struggling with. And when Mr. Curdy talked about, are there ways that we should be able to have conversations that are emotional that we may not agree on? I think we have to be able to have that conversation, but I do not see a time in which we will be mandating the vaccinations.
Can you talk a little bit about the high school expansion? I heard just a little bit. I'm on the Jerome Principal Key Communicator Committee, and he talked a little bit about, expanding Jerome and then possibly need for a 4th high school. And I know with a 10th grader there now, it's already just so difficult for these kids to make a sports team. There's just so many kids. So where are we going to be with that, and what is the timing?
So right now we have the board will be asked to approve the addition of up to 16 more modulars there next year at Jerome.
Okay.
If you've been at Jerome, they've turned some of those hallway areas into classrooms. We also plan to add an addition onto Jerome High School that, if all goes well, would open in the fall of 23. So if that all gets approved and the architects get on board and we get the drawings approved, it would take it would probably take about 18 months for us to get the addition up and running, and that would get rid of all the modulars.
Okay.
And then at the same time, I think as a community, we need to have that conversation. I don't think the answer is shifting 600 Jerome kids to Scioto and adding on to Scioto. Part of that conversation is purely geographical. If you ask people who go to Jerome right now to go to Scioto, there are 2 ways across the river. If your kid plays soccer and you got to pick them up from practice and you got to go across the Reservoir Bridge to get there. It's going to take you 40 minutes to go pick up your kid and come back and have dinner. So there is that. Jerome Village right now has 1,000 homes up and running. Originally, the plan was 2,700. We were informed about a week and a half ago, it could go as high as 4,400. So if you look at Jerome Village, there could be 4 times as many families in Jerome Village as there are now. We don't have the capacity to take another 3,400 kiddos and place them in any of our buildings. So I think our conversation needs to be, what do we want? And what does that look like? You brought up one of the points when Central Ohio schools, and it's not just Dublin, it's kind of how we've all operated. When a high school gets to around 2,000, you start running into the fact that there are still 5 kids on the basketball team. There's 1 principal cellist. There are only so many opportunities as schools get bigger. We have intentionally in this district had smaller neighborhood elementary schools that max out in the 700 range. Sometimes when we've gotten big, we've pushed it a little bit, gone as high as 8 or 9. But there's something to be said for an elementary school where the principal knows every kid's name, where families know the teachers. There's a comfort level if you've had kids go through here where there's not a lot of turnover. You know who your kid could have from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. You've built relationships. Do we want high schools of 2,500? My guess would be that's not where we want to go. That's not my decision. That's an us, not a me. So how do we have those conversations? I will tell you that I do have folks looking at parcels of land while they're still available now. You don't have to build the high school right now, but when the time comes, you better have a place to build it. And as fast as developers, and I don't blame the developers, they're selling. Like right now, our housing market is insane. If I were a developer, I'd be buying land and putting shovels in ground and getting going because people are putting down the money. We also have to be mindful, and I'm not an economist. There was a time in 2007, 2008, when we thought we would have to, when Dublin thought it was going to have to build an elementary up there, then the housing market slid a little bit and things kind of slowed down. I don't know where that's going to go, but if it continues like it is, we have to have those conversations moving forward. Short-term addition on Jerome, the money was passed in 2018 with a promise to get rid of the modulars.
Yeah.
So we have the resources to build the addition on Jerome, to make Jerome functional now without those modulars. But by the time we get there in 23, 24, we're probably going to have a conversation about what's next.
Was some of the land donated for $1, I'll say? And do we have that kind of partnership for maybe a land agreement for the high school too? Or is it something that will have to go on a levy to pass to buy a parcel of land?
We have the resources that if we needed to now, we could buy a parcel of land. The land was donated for Eversol and Depp. That was a partnership with Nationwide. We own additional land adjacent to Jerome if we needed, and that was purchased recently if we needed another elementary school site. I can tell you that Depp is full, Eversol is almost full. And part of that is we were planning 100, we were told there was going to be 100 houses a year. It's 350 houses a year right now. And that's how fast it's coming. So it wasn't anyone's fault that the 2018 redistricting had the experts predicted a certain cadence. And because of the housing market, that cadence was accelerating.
Do you see a follow-up redistricting or minor shift, I would say not big wide, to kind of help that shift some back to Glacier Ridge or Penny or any of those scenarios?
I think when you look at a new subdivision coming in, we could say if there's an area that's being developed right now. Now, obviously, that's probably gonna come here because they couldn't walk.
Right.
But if you look at some of the new subdivisions coming up there, we could just say this subdivision's going to Penny. Rather than, so we don't want to move anybody who's already been moved. We want people to be able to feel comfortable that where they are now after the, I don't use the word trauma, but after that when you move schools, it's a big deal. So we don't want to move anybody who we've moved. But if there's a place that there's a development that we can say this is now Penny. Penny has room right now. If we had to do that, we could do that. Middle schools, if we had to balance a little bit more of the Griselle Eversole, middle schools are easier because it's 3 years, less sibling situations. And we probably could give a couple people who are in that, couple subdivisions who are in that area a choice. And say, hey, there's room here. Do you want to start shifting some of those kids back to Griselle? We could do that.
Like Glacier Splits are Eversole run right now, but would you see like some of our Eversole run kids could have the option to go to Griselle and then we would split 3 ways? Or you would look at a different elementary school that splits only?
You'd probably look at a different
Back to
elementary
Griselle.
school. Like right now, one of the challenges we have with Indian Run, where we have room, Indian Run goes to 2 middle schools. If you were to bring other kids back from other schools to Indian Run, it could then go to 3 middle schools. And again, I think when we look at that sense of community, there's something to be with the same group. There's something for kids. It's enough of an issue when you go to 6th grade that your friend group that may have been 100 kids, 120 kids here, now it's getting split. Some of your friends are going to other schools, and now you're getting other kids coming in 6th grade, and 6th grade's a goofy time. So the more comfort and focused we can be on the social concerns of those kids, the better I think we'll be.
Where do you see PTOs and how can we support the school district?
I think as we go through some of these issues, staying focused on what it is we can control. One of the fears of not just your superintendent, but superintendents all over is we're getting national issues creeping into local schools. And when you look at some of the pressure that we're facing, it's not necessarily good for us, and it's from both sides. We have all the resources we need in the Dublin City Schools to have an elite school district. When we start getting pulled into things by national political movements from both sides, it just takes an awful lot of energy away from what we want to be doing. So I could tell you right now, we have no interest in indoctrinating anyone's students. We have no interest in, we don't teach critical race theory. It's not anywhere in our agenda. Our director of diversity, inclusion, and equity would tell you, we don't teach critical race theory. People come to every board meeting and tell us to stop teaching critical race theory. It's a national conversation that people are using to engender certain emotions from us. How do we get that out and stay focused on providing our kids with the best possible education? And how do we talk about, I've been amazed at the support mechanisms that are in this community for anybody in need, from Dublin Bridges to Welcome Warehouse, which is now One Dublin, to we have all of these resources in Dublin. We can do this better than anybody else. We just have to keep our eye on the ball and talk about this is what we want for every kid. We want every kid to be valued in every classroom. We want every kid to have the access to elite curriculum instruction and opportunity. And we want every kid to be prepared for success. And that's just John's definition of equity. It's that access, it's that value, and that's preparation. And I think when you talk to people about it, if you can have a common definition for what does equity mean, and it doesn't mean my definition will be our definition. That's just kind of where I'm starting. And that's what I believe. I can get anybody arguing. So how do you have those conversations with empathy?
We have an online question. You touched on it a little bit, Dr. M. Are there still plans for high school redistricting to be done in the next few years? Small amount of car students go to Jerome. Do you expect those kids to remain at Jerome or eventually be redistricted to Kaufman?
I don't see right now any redistricting at the high school. I think we can build on the Jerome right now. Kaufman's not exactly small. In fact, right now Kaufman has more kids in it than Jerome does. And they're both operating at over 100% what would be our capacity, and Scioto is about 92% capacity. So shifting a lot of kids over there isn't the answer right now either. So right now, I think we're pretty much in a let's build for what we have. Let's see where the numbers go in Jerome Village, and then we're going to have that conversation as a district. Is high school number 4 something that we need to look at, or are there other options that we would want to do? In terms of levies and those types of things, we right now look like we'll be able to stay off for operating until 2024, which would also then could potentially be when we have to answer some of those questions about the what's next when it comes to buildings and those types of things.
PTOs across the district always struggle with equity. I mean, you're meeting with the presidents tomorrow, and what one PTO can raise, we're very fortunate here at Glacier Ridge. It's definitely not comparable. And even from that diverse standpoint, our active members are not representative of our school. Is Dr. Hamilton available to help PTOs across the district and kind of look at us individually and as a whole group across the district on how we can look at some of those challenges and where we can improve, or give us some guidance on how to increase membership, or to look at what's equitable from different PTOs, or even different boosters rates different amounts.
Well, first part of your question, yes, Dr. Hamilton's available and she would love to talk with anyone. She has said, we just did a podcast that went live yesterday afternoon. She wants to meet with everybody. And if you're someone who has concerns about our DEI work, she'll meet with you. If you're someone who wants to embrace it and be part of the conversation, she will meet with you. Right now, I've asked our operations department, and this is something that I hear across the board, to do an audit of all of our playgrounds. Some of our PTOs are able to raise the funds and resources to add equipment or redo a playground or those kind of things. Some of ours, there's no way that they're going to raise the kind of funds to do that. It's something that as a district we may need to do and to replace and repair some playgrounds. And part of that is a conversation about equity. And if a building doesn't have the same socioeconomic support from the parents and the community that feed that school, do they need help? I have yet to find someone who says, well, no, they shouldn't have it. We had to raise it ourselves. They should have to raise it themselves. I haven't run into that person. So we have to look at playgrounds, for example. I know that we have some schools who can do a dance-a-thon or a fundraiser and raise thousands of dollars in an afternoon. We have other schools who that may not be their budget for the year. So yes, we have to have those types of equity discussions. I know that Jerome High School raises the money and puts up a indoor hitting facility for their baseball and softball team, and it's raised from the parents who go to Jerome. Scioto's got a plan that they want to work with the district and pay that off over a longer period of time, but need help getting there. Yes, we have to have those conversations. And that's part of being in a diverse district. And you'll hear people say this all the time: fair isn't equal and equal isn't fair. So when we look at defining equity, and when we talk about every kid having value, having access, and being prepared for success, that access needs to be something that we need to make sure all of our schools have in terms of that equity of access to programs and resources.
Michelle, Heather, we're in our leadership team when you guys help with our second playground. So it's that example of exactly what you were saying of our school to have the second one.
Well,
Raise one.
you know, I know because of some issues that we've had, Riverside's playground needs some updates. And Riverside's playground has some equipment that right now kids aren't able to use. PTO isn't able to generate the same type of resources that you probably could generate here. So is that incumbent on us to help to make sure that those kids, when they go outside at recess, have a safe place with equipment that is safe and secure that they can play on, so that we know how important for research it is to have that outside playtime and that free time that gives students a better opportunity to succeed when they come back inside. So
I think those are good conversations to have. So thanks for.
yeah, we have to have those. And you know, you'll hear me use the term, we have to embrace productive discomfort. Some of the conversations we have to have are uncomfortable, but when we have the uncomfortable conversations with a listening ear and with empathy and looking for what brings us together, at the end of the day, we can be really productive in where we go. So we have to be able to embrace those conversations. And you have a hard stop, probably have things to go to, and I could talk for hours and hours about education. If you have questions, concerns, of course, we always encourage people to go to their building principals first. If you have things that are more global in nature, we do have PTO presidents, I think tomorrow, where we'll get together. And again, we're one community, we work together, and that's our goal, is to make sure that as much as possible, we can be on the same page. Thank you for everything that you do and giving up time to be here today. And it's an honor to serve as your superintendent. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks. Likewise.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Dr. M, for speaking. I know that is super beneficial that we even have that opportunity to get to hear him and ask questions of him. Okay, so we are going to move on to the approving the PTO General meeting minutes from April. So Shilpa's going to come up and do that for us.
Approving the minutes for April. Does anybody have any changes, or do I have a motion to approve? Melissa, and the second, Rachel.
All right, thank you. Next, we will have Melissa come up, and she is going to go over the August monthly reports as well as the 2021-2022 proposed budget, and we will vote on that as well.
Hello, I'm Melissa Bogner, and I am co-treasurer this year with Ellen Little. She's unable to be here. Lucky her, she doesn't have to stand at this mic. But we just wanted to, Shayna linked it in the electronic version for those that are on the call right now, and there's physical versions for anyone here. What we thought we would start off doing is give an overview of where we were last year. As everyone knows, it was a crazy, unpredictable year. And we did start off our year with around $40,000 in our bank account. And by the end, we actually had a estimated profit of around $8,000. And so around May, we are around $48,000. And that gave us the opportunity to give 2 great Tiger grants to our school. So for those here, you can see the shades outside. You're able to help fund that, as well as our Start with Hello t-shirts that will be coming in pretty soon. So we ended that school year with around $35,000, which also means we started this school year with around $35,000. And I'm gonna kind of move then into what our proposed budget is for this year. Our, as I mentioned, we're gonna start off with $35,000. We had, our fiscal year goes July 1st through June 30th. And what we're looking to do this year is to have an income from our fundraisers around $27,000. And then our estimated expenses are going to be around $32,000. That will actually give us an estimated loss of around $5,400 and help lower our expected balance to around $30,000. So I wanted to take a minute on, give a little bit of a history of why we're actually planning to have a loss. And so a couple years ago, 2 exec boards ago, we did some research with the help of some lawyers that were on our team of what should a nonprofit keep in their bank account as a reserve. And there was nothing solid. So there were documents that said 3 to 6 months for a nonprofit. There were documents that said 2 years for a nonprofit of what your operating budget is. So what we decided to do 2 years ago was, that wasn't very solid. So they dug deep, and what it said was that no matter what you decide on for a nonprofit, is that your policies and procedures are documented and then you follow those policies and procedures. So it was right around the time of when our finance committee meets. And what they did was they looked at our policies, procedures as the treasurers and where there were gaps. And there wasn't policies and procedures of how much we should keep in our reserves. So at that time, they decided that to put into our PTO documents to try to carry 6 to 12 months of our operating expenses. And so what that would look like is we looked at our expenses for the past 8 years, and we have averaged $23,000 in expenses, and on average have had a profit of $11,000. So when we look at that $23,000 as our annual operating budget and try to keep in a bank account 6 to 12 months of that, that gives us kind of between that really $15,000 to $35,000 mark. So that is part of the reason why we are continuing to try to reduce our bank account, because we want to spend the money when our students are in the school. So a couple of years ago, when we were doing this analysis, we had a bank account of $72,000. That would mean if you were a 3rd grade parent, we weren't spending it till almost your kid was in 6th grade. And what we want to do is use that money while your child is in school. And we feel that still having a $30,000 budget in our bank account at the end of the year still allow us to fund every single event, enrichment activities, staff appreciation, everything on our proposed budget, and still really pay for all of next year as well. Are there any, and I talked fast on that, and we're on time crunch. Is there any questions that people have about any one line item or where you were at last year? Yep.
So I'm for a new year, so what is the extra, $5 grand loss with that expense?
So what we would have, our bank account will never be zero. Our bank account will stay between $30,000 and $35,000. And our expenses this year are around $32,000. But what we don't want to do is ask parents to fundraise more than what we can, that we need to.
No, that my question is, last year was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This year, so what's that? Where's that going?
Sure. There was a lot of events last year we couldn't do. An author visit. We budgeted $2,500 for an author visit, but we couldn't have speakers in school. So there was a major expense that we didn't use. We budgeted to have last year ice skating event at the Chiller for $1,000, but we couldn't have an event in person. So there was a lot of things that we would have loved to have. Given COVID, we couldn't have them. And so that's where a lot of that gap happened. That great question? Okay. Any other questions? I think as Dr. Marchowson said, we're very fortunate as our school, as our PTO, that our families continuously give every year.
And we just want to make sure that we don't ask for too much. Every time Pete has asked for something, we've been able to help fund that for the school. And we just want to make sure that we fall within our nonprofit fiduciary responsibilities and staying fiscally responsible to everyone. If there are no questions, then just like Shilpa, oh, sure, go
I
ahead.
have one more question. So
Yeah.
So, you know, I understand you want. Well, here's a question. Is there value having a larger chunk of money, bigger projects, for example, like you said, a big playground upgrade, that might cost us 20. If we suck our, really most of our grounds on that one, we might not be able to do bigger things because we have one more. So the question is, do you see like our larger capital expenses for the school that will come from tuition?
So even with that large budget, Pete's sitting on $30,000 right now that we've donated to him to do the library renovation. And so until a big project is done, we don't want to fundraise for another big project. Pete has nothing in his pipeline that he's communicated to the PTO that we will need for that long-term thing.
But it's a valid point. I mean, I think that that's how we ended up funding the newer playground that's near the parking lot. Is we realized when Heather and I were on the board that we had like $85,000 like in excess of our operating expense. And we could say, be like, hey, can we do that? And he worked with the school district and whatever. And I felt really good about that. We could do something big, that it just wasn't matching t-shirts for the kids or whatever, that it was something that would have kind of like a legacy. So I agree with you. I think that it should be, you know, we shouldn't just spend it down on little things. We should also, you know, have a goal.
5 years, I need this, 10 years, I need this.
Yeah, and there's a process for that. So a couple of things we've talked a lot about at the PTO board, our philosophy of how and when to spend money. Because one philosophy is like Social Security, I'm paying into it with my children being here with the expectation of I'm not going to use it until I'm eventually out. So that applied to PTO budgeting is I'm going to put money in, and theoretically the people that were before me put money in for my kid as well. Pros and cons to both. I think our board has decided we want to try to spend as much money while the kids are here, so that way we can fundraise for a playground. Your kids can see the playground more or less, and it's more applicable and more ownership. So that's kind of the philosophy that we went on. Also, with that philosophy, we do have some flexibility. Number one, as Michelle said, we can fundraise for that playground. We both had a playground fund that the PTO put in, and we also fundraise, and that cost about $40,000, which obviously is more than a year's PTO budget. So we fundraised and had that initiative. So that's how we did that. The library, on the other hand, is kind of option two of we have used multiple years of donations for a larger pot, and really the $35,000 is kind of 2 years worth of it, more or less. And we can easily go through that process of spending a big chunk, $35,000, with a couple years grant donations. So some flexibility. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, follow-up question would be, so what, you know, obviously we have property taxes here, income taxes, but what expectations that the school district would also be providing? Like, the whole point is like PTO responsibility hands-on, and, you know, our property taxes. You know, what point is that balance? Where's that line? Yeah, that's the discussion.
It is, and you heard Dr. Marshausen talk about it a little bit. Because as at Glacier Ridge, we've gone through that journey mostly with technology, because we're able to buy technology, and it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we bought about 60 to 90 Macs, if I remember correctly. Yet another school might not be able to have the PTO supplement that. So you have two sides of the coin, where it's the PTO's responsibility to supplement technology, which should be provided by the district. Yet then you have
one elementary school that can afford it on their own. So I think it's something that the district is really digging into, especially with Dr. Marshausen's leadership on what does equity mean? Where does the PTO come in terms of responsibilities? Is the playground a PTO responsibility? Dr. Marshausen is now shifting to it isn't, but it may have been in the past. Same thing with technology. You know, is technology a PTO responsibility? With addition of Chromebooks and more affordability, it is more of a district responsibility. So I think those shifts are starting to happen and come off of PTOs, and then we're able to do things like purchase a shade, which is kind of a luxury. Is it needed? Absolutely not. And schools can get away with not having a shade, but our fundraising is allowing us to have it be a permanent.
And I think too, from a historical standpoint, those past 8 years I referenced, we did try to have a balanced budget, but the average profit we made was $11,000 across those 8 years. So as we do it, like I said, our parents are just awesome and have given us lots of opportunities to be able to do those additional things. Pete, are there any questions online?
Nope.
If nobody has any other questions, then we would get a motion to approve this year's proposed budget. Okay. Second. Ellie? And then what we need to do is vote all in favor. If you are on the phone, could you type a comment to Pete that says if you are in favor, or I'll ask in a second for not in favor. So first, here, anyone who is in favor, please raise your hand so Shilpa can help. 7, 8, 9. And then Pete will give us the online voters, and then anyone who is not in favor. And Pete, can you total those two from?
Tallying now.
I had 9 yeses in person and no nos.
I see 4 in favor so far. And it's like 5 or 4 abstentions.
So that would be 13 yeses.
Or I take that back, we haven't said no yet, so we'll say they are not in favor, sorry.
Sure. Any nos online? All right, so that's 13 yeses, Shilpa, and 4 abstained. And so this year's budget goes ahead and passes. The last paper in your thing is just the activity that we've had so far this year. We are doing awesome with our fundraiser from a dollar standpoint. From a percentage of participation, I think we're just at 14% for school participation, but we definitely will reach our goals out the lines. Any other finance questions that? And like Ellie mentioned, if you have any follow-up questions, please just email the PTO mailbox or find us. Pete, can I go ahead and turn it over to you?
And she'll correction, had a couple more, 6 total in favor of the budget.
We do have a hard deadline, but I did want to open it up for questions about anything specific to Glacier Ridge. But before I do that, I want to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, you can see the shade outside. I've sent some pictures of it, of kids using it. It has been a phenomenal timing in terms of the heat. A couple of weeks ago, kids are using it. We're expanding it. We're going to put mulch under the whole thing. We're trying to decide if we leave it grass or mulch, but we are going to put mulch under, which is being taken care of by the grounds department. And then we are going to apply for some grants for some more chairs. So I think that was definitely a great purchase. I'm also telling you, going back to John's question about how we decide and what we decide to spend the money on, it is a process. Melissa talks about, Pete tells us what the school wants. And I know that she says that just in terms of a quick conversation, but really we have a school committee where we decide what are the needs of the building. And it's a diverse representation. I then share that with the staff, and then I share it with the PTO board. So it is a very thoughtful process. It's also why we have not moved forward quickly with the media center renovation, because we want it to be very thoughtful and purposeful. And not only that, but research-based, as well as kids and community members. So we will go through that process this year. Last year, of course, was dominated by COVID. But we do have parent representation, student representation on our committee, which will meet throughout the year and really study what good media centers are, what does the research say about effectiveness, and where are the trends going. So that is something that we'll be using the funds for, that we have currently stored, and then that was just last year's purchase. I'd also like to say thank you. In case you didn't know, the PTO does have a staff appreciation committee. And lunch was purchased for us on that second day of back to work. And although lunch is sometimes just lunch, it allows for two huge factors. Number one, our resilience and our ability to connect with one another. So those two things, just our mindset and our ability to come together as an organization with something as simple as lunch, does go a long way. So thank you to those major things. Any questions that I can open up about building specific issues, questions, or comments? I will say, Dr. Marshausen talked about it. We had a kind of emergency meeting at 10 o'clock today with elementary principals. You've heard me say in my Q&As that lunch is our most vulnerable time. And I actually got that wording from Dr. Marshausen. When we first planned what lunch looked like, we weren't quite sure of the implications. Our intent was that lunch, kids would pull up their masks at the 15-minute mark, or take a bite and pull up their mask to negate the 15 minutes of close contact. Based on the guidance from the nurse and quarantine procedures from Franklin County, the dependent or the variable on that is how long the exposure happened while a student was symptomatic. So the first thing I'll say is, if a child is symptomatic, and I ask this of everybody, including Ryan Curdy and our own children, is if a child is symptomatic, keep them home. I know it's inconvenient, because the implications of that are on a grand scale of quarantine. And the reason I say that is because if a child comes to school and has potential symptoms, but we're not sure if they are positive or not, every minute that child is in close contact counts towards those 15 minutes. So if a child comes to school 3 days and tests positive on that third day, now lunch is well beyond the 15 minutes, which means now anybody that child was sitting near for those 3 days during lunch does quarantine. I'm not getting into, and I don't want to discuss the ethics of that or the personal opinions of quarantine. We don't have a choice in terms of a district. We follow Franklin County Public Health, but I will say that has become the most difficult part. The simple answer is, why don't you have kids sit 6 feet away like we did last year? And that would negate the quarantine. The hard part is we now have 200 kids back in the building. We only had 300 kids last year. So we could seat kids 6 feet away. If we did that, we have to start lunches much earlier, because one of our largest grade levels is about 110 kids, and we don't have enough space to seat them out. So that now means we have to divide the grade level in half. So we as an elementary team recognize it's a vulnerability, and we are talking about it, and I'll have to circle back with my colleagues to see what was discussed. It is not an easy answer, because space, especially as Dr. M said, is a premium at depth. So not an easy solution, but I also recognize, especially over these past week or so, with more quarantine and more positive cases, especially at Glacier Ridge where it's hitting home, it's an inconvenience for families to have them at home. Any questions about COVID or anything that I can
Do
answer?
you see yourself moving towards like integrating the recess time so that they're not segmented into their different pods?
Yes, we do not have locations. Is that what you're talking about,
Yeah.
zones and locations?
Yeah, I thought you were splitting zones.
We started at the beginning of the year for the purpose of community building. One thing we
Okay.
found last year was the classes really bonded as a classroom community because they were forced to play with their own kids
Yeah.
in the classroom, and they would play with kids that they necessarily would play with. So we started the first week and a half with that, and then now we stopped and we're revisiting it with our building advisory team next week at our meeting to see, do we want to do it on a rotating basis, maybe every Friday? I think, I could be wrong, I haven't solicited too much information from the kids, but I think the kids would say, nope, we're good. We want to play with who we want to, where we want to, when we want to. So I think that will be the case, but I wanted to get the staff's input first.
Any other questions on that?
There are none. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat.
Okay, if you want a school lunch, it's being served, but Piata, Chipotle are probably maybe better options. Not that school lunch is not phenomenal, but do you want to close or do you want to say anything else, Ally?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for those of you that joined online. We're not sure how we will progress with these meetings moving forward. It is definitely possible to do both in person and virtual, but it does add a little bit of a complication. So we'll talk as a PTO board, but if you have feedback on that in general, let us know. But on behalf of the PTO and Glacier Ridge community, thank you very much for coming, both online and in person.
It's nice to be all in the room and like have interaction.
And we went back and forth as a board.
We're on there or on here.
What's that?
Is that one recording?
This one is, yep.